Great. It's brilliant to be here with you today. So welcome everybody. This is the third masterclass in our online programme, the first one of module 2, which is personalised care in a complex system. And we're delighted that we've got Professor Mary Uhl-Bien with us today to talk about leading in complexity, and a chance for us all to connect around that concept and what that means for us in embedding personalised care across the NHS. So thank you very much everybody for joining us. Let's just introduce you to the team we've got today. So we've got various members of the team. So I'll be hosting, and in a moment we'll introduce Mary, our guest speaker, who'll be leading the masterclass. Rosie, as normal, will be our Zoom host and give you any tech support. If you just kind of put in the chat that you need some help, Rosie will be monitoring that and just making sure that she can help you in whatever way she can. We'll have chat monitors, because I can't keep an eye on it all. There's 164 of you in the call now, so we have chat monitors. So I'll be calling on them during the call, just to say, just to sort of like, read out some of the things or some of the themes that are emerging from your discussions in the chat. All of the rest of the team are either people with lived experience or leadership tutors and coaches who've been working with us on this Leadership for Personalised Care programme, and some of them will be in your breakout rooms later. You may or may not be in a room with one of those hosts. So thank you to the team today. So just wanted to cover a little bit, or kind of get us back in the zone of thinking about module 1 of the Leadership for Personalised Care programme. So hopefully most of you were either on those live events that we held before Christmas, or have had a chance to watch the recordings and have a look at the course materials. If you haven't watched those, don't worry, they're still live and available for you. But if you could just tell us in the chat now, one thing that you learned through module 1 if you completed it. Okay, so let's hear what any kind of nuggets that have come out, or reflections you've had since possibly through doing module 1. So if you just put some comments in the chat, and I'll give you a couple of seconds. And then I will ask Julie and then Simon to sort of read out in the room any themes that are emerging.
So we've got a few Ask the Elephants coming through. Those of you who were here last time will remember what that is.
Would you like to explain for Mary's benefit what Ask the Elephants means, Simon?
No, because it's just completely slipped my mind.
I can, but I'm sure you can remember, Julie. Would you like to explain?
This was Philippa Russell, who was talking about the sort of community wisdom and keeping the community wisdom together. So being able to ask the elephants themselves what works well for themselves from their own environment, really. So it was around really speaking direct to the community rather than just speaking to other professionals.
It was about Hannibal, wasn't it? Crossing the Alps. I mean, my history is not very good, but it was Hannibal, and said, "How do we get over?" And somebody said to him, "Ask the elephants. They've been there before. They know what the path is like, and they are the experts." So the fact that real change happens in real work, and that will be one of the themes coming through from this module around leading in complexity, which is great. Maybe one other thing that people are saying they got from module 1.
People are talking about, again, sort of co-production and people cooperating together, co-production and people speaking to each other. And then there's some very individual little nuggets, like the one recently that's just come through is about they'd love to be able to develop a time bank. And
brilliant. So there's actually some individual actions people want to take as well. That's fantastic. Do keep those
just
coming.
to confirm that our collective memory is working, Linda has confirmed it was Hannibal, so thank you for that in the chat.
Yeah, I forget which mountain range it was, that's the only thing. But there is a thing, there's lots of research around collective memory. And that's actually one of the reasons why collaboration is so important in leading in complexity, because yeah, two heads, 3 heads, 4 heads are definitely better than one. So and there's research behind that. So question 2 then, one thing you're hoping to get from module 2. So what are you hoping to learn from module 2? In the chat if you like, and we can capture 1 or 2 of these and see what people are saying. Okay, so Julian, Simon, anything coming through from there?
Not yet. I think people are
No.
thinking.
Okay, that's fine. It's fine to think. And if, in fact, you're thinking to yourself, I'm going to see what's going to emerge, then that's also okay, because that is a real feature about leading in complexity, of course.
Yeah. So one person says, I'd like to know, what do we mean by complexity? So that'd be one thing to learn.
Brilliant.
Is someone else saying, I'd like to learn how I can support colleagues not to respond with bureaucracy?
Oh, lovely.
Very helpful.
Okay. So somebody, I just noticed a comment there, somebody saying they didn't do module 1. It's absolutely fine. The course materials are available, and so are the recordings of the masterclasses. So in the emails that we've sent you, you should have had links to those, and you can you can access those afterwards. So yes, absolutely. You can start now, you can start anywhere. And that is also another theme about systems leadership: start anywhere and go everywhere, of course. And so it's fine to be here. If you need to go back, or you need to refresh, that's fine at any time. So great. One thing about what is complexity. So Mary and I recorded a video last week, which has got some of the basics of what we mean by complexity. So we were hoping that some of you would have had a chance at least to kind of skim through some of the materials, or watch that video beforehand. If you don't, it doesn't matter, because I think you'll still get a lot out of today, but it might be that you go back and watch that video afterwards to fill in some of the gaps. So we're not going to start straight with the detail of what is complexity, but much more into the leadership part of that, which is hopefully okay for you. So let's just go through the guidelines of how we're going to work together. Oh, there's a poll, sorry, first. I forgot the poll. So on a scale of 1 to 10, so where 1 is low, could you rate your understanding right now of leading in complex systems? So your understanding of leading in complex systems right now. Okay, about half of you voted. Huge mix. Okay, we've got about 3/4 of people have voted, so I'll just give it a couple more seconds. And it's a huge mix. So some people are saying 8 out of 10, so they've got quite a high knowledge. Nobody's put 10, so you're all a very modest bunch. But we've got a few people in the 8 and 9 category. A few people right low down the bottom, and then the most people in the middle there, around 4 or 5. So it's a kind of like low to medium understanding, and that's absolutely fine. Let's see if that changes at all by the end. So hopefully you can capture that data, Rosie, we can compare at the end. Thank you very much. So let's just go through the ground rules today. I mean, it's really important to do this when we're working online, isn't it? Because we don't know each other, and we're not really face to face, and we can't see each other when we're in a big gallery like this all at once. So just a reminder about the ground rules that we've agreed to before, and I'll just go through these very quickly and then ask you to consent to them by writing "I consent" in the chat. So just a reminder, we are recording this session. So except for the group discussions, we just want to let you know that we want to create a safe space, so therefore we have got a shared responsibility for psychological safety for ourselves, but also each other's learning, and that includes a respect for confidentiality. So we wouldn't we wouldn't share anything outside this room that would be attributable to any individual unless we had their permission. Use the chat for communication, and don't worry about your spelling. We would love to hear from everybody individually, but obviously there's 200 of us on here, so we won't be able to do that. So please do use the chat to talk to us. Any tech issues, stick it in the chat, we'll try to help. You get more out of this through participation. So some of you will inevitably not be able to be part of the group discussion, but that, I'm telling you, is where the main learning will occur along with Mary's with Mary's input. So if you have a chance to do that, then please do stay on for that discussion. You will have heard Maggie Wood say in one of our last masterclasses, self-awareness is your leadership superpower. And that reflection and conversation that you have with others is kind of like one of the most important acts you can do as a leader. We are not live tweeting today. It says we are live tweeting, but we're not going to be live tweeting today. There are lots of sensitivities around communication, obviously at the moment, around the NHS, and the vaccine programme is of course a massive priority. We're not going to tell you not to tweet, and we've got a handle and hashtag which you can use, but you won't see us live tweeting. There's a slight typo on that slide, which I apologise for. So if you could consent to those, that would be great. Brilliant. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a context of the programme then. So some of you will have known this. I'm not going to dwell on it very much longer, but it's just to remind us that we've had module 1, where we heard from Philippa and John Evans, who, if you didn't see the BBC documentary last night, please do go and have a look at it on iPlayer. So John Evans, who was one of our keynote speakers in Masterclass 1 last time, was on the BBC documentary last night on BBC 2 about the, I forget exactly the title of it, but it was about the hidden story of disability, I think. And it was really good. So it's great to see John on there and a lot of colleagues. So we had our 2 masterclasses, which was really just an introduction to leadership in personalised care. Those are available through YouTube if you want to watch them, and I've talked about the course materials. This module then is about complexity, leading in complexity, and looking forward to February and March, we've got collaborative leadership, and then also looking at personalised leadership for wellbeing, equality and inclusion. We've also got action learning sets starting on the 3rd of February. If you have applied for an action learning set, you should have heard from us. So if you've applied and you haven't heard, do let Rosie know, just in case there's been a glitch tech-wise. But we have actually got all of those applications and should have communicated to you and shortly with some links and things and a course booklet for that. So in terms of today then, so that was just the video I was talking about that Mary and I recorded the other week, and they're the course booklets. So in terms of today, just a brief agenda. We've nearly finished this welcome introductions. Going to pass over to Mary in one moment, and then some time for learning and reflection, and we'll just hear some feedback from everybody before we end. So it's time to introduce Professor Mary Uhl-Bien. So we're really delighted you could be here with us today. Thank you so much, Mary, because I know you must be incredibly busy. So Mary is the BNSF Railway Endowed Professor of Leadership in the Neely School of Business at Texas Christian University. Mary's research focuses on complexity leadership, relational leadership and followership. Mary was recognised as the #6 most influential leadership scholar between 1990 and 2017, which is pretty amazing achievement in Leadership Quarterly, and is a visiting professor, consultant and expert in executive education and leadership internationally. So we're so delighted to have her input onto our Leadership for Personalised Care programme. So Mary, thank you so much for joining us.
It's wonderful to see you again, Catherine, and see the team. And it's really great. There's so many people here. So I'm looking forward to this.
Great. So I think we've made you co-host, so feel free to share your own slides. I'm going to hand over to you and look forward to hearing what you've got to say. Thank you.
Wonderful. So the slides are coming up. And here we go. I know that we did the teaser video last week, and I saw that someone asked the question, what is complexity? And what I would do is refer you to that teaser video, because we spent some time talking about the basics of that. I'll do a quick overview again here just to remind people, but the focus of what I want to do today is really talk about how the world is changing and what it means for leadership and how we need to lead differently. So the focus is on leading in a complex world. And to think about this and understand it, what we really need to start with is recognizing that we have some old models of leadership, and they really are getting older. I mean, I think for a long time, I would talk about old models of leadership. Many people were still operating under them, but I'm seeing those models go away almost by the day. So things have changed, and with the pandemic last year, it has really, really morphed into a new way of thinking. I understand that NHS is still very much in some of these old models and has issues with bureaucracy and other kinds of things, and might still be pretty focused on top down. But the new way of thinking about leadership is what we're calling complexity views of leadership, but they're also shared views or collective views or distributed. So it's called all kinds of names. The basic assumption of these is that leadership isn't just relegated to the leader or to a manager. In the past, what we've done is we've equated the term manager and leader. And I think that's somewhat problematic, because when we equate the word manager and leader, what we do is we relegate leadership just to those people in management positions. But because of the complexities facing organizations today, leadership is becoming much more distributed, and we're recognizing that people can do leadership and should do leadership anywhere in the organization, which means it can go up, it can go across, it can still go down, and we can still have management, but it means that management really is more of that top, that down old model. It's how we get people to perform productively and align with goals in an organizational structure that's aligned around a strategy. But leadership is much more. It's about using influence to create change. So the focus we're going to be talking about today is what I call the first mindset shift, which is the idea of moving from top down to collective. So we have to broaden our view and understand that when we talk about leadership, we're not just talking this top down, we're talking about a collective process. And in that collective process, people engage together to co-create leadership. Now I say they co-create leadership and followership. So you have people who are leading and people who are following, but even if you have someone who has a role or a position of being a leader, that doesn't mean they're leading all the time. Quite often the most effective people are ones who, as they're in that position, they are also letting others lead and they're following. So that's the co-creation. And I heard you discuss in the review of the first session, co-production. That's a term we're using in our followership research to talk about co-producing outcomes. I think it might be a little different for you, but that's the basic idea. So with that intro, let's start. If we're thinking about leadership in a complex world, what is complexity? Complexity is rich interconnectivity. So in complexity, systems that are interconnected, if they have a lot of interconnectivity, have greater potential for what we call a complexity event or an emergence event. And what happens in an emergence event is that when things come together and they interact, they bump up against each other, they have the potential to create what in physics is called a phase transition, which means it morphs, it changes the other parts of the system. That's an emergence event. And in that event, things are not decomposable back to the original parts. So now we're in a new state, a new order, or as we're seeing now, what's being called a new normal. So the fact that now everyone knows the term new normal is saying that we have been through a really massive complexity event in the last year. Now, what we know about complexity is that when you're in complexity, it takes complexity to beat complexity. So to be able to respond to it, we have to be able to adapt. And that's what I call the adaptive process. So I want to start by showing you the adaptive process because it's the key underlying dynamic we need to understand if we're going to lead appropriately in complexity. So in the adaptive process, it starts with pressures that come in from the outside. So the pressures come onto the system, and what those pressures do is they require agents in the system, and an agent is a person, an idea, information, technology, resource. It's lots of things. It's not just a person. In leadership, historically, we've talked only about people, but now we're talking about agents. So agents in a system get pressured to change. And from those pressures, then there's the rise of a need to innovate. And that need to innovate comes because when there's a complexity event, we have to do things differently. It's an adaptive challenge, and if we don't adapt, we'll die. So it starts to activate this ideation process, and people or agents realizing that they need change and pushing for change, which is the need to innovate. But because we're still in a system that needs to survive, we also have the need to produce. So if we think about organizations, we'll have the complexity event that occurs, and let's say the pandemic last year, and businesses or healthcare systems are saying, oh my gosh, we've got to do things differently. We can't keep going with the same, or we're going to have this huge spread of the virus, but yet there's still a need to produce. So business organizations, healthcare systems, were trying to figure out how do we still generate production or generate outcomes. And so when adaptation pressures come in, they put a tension between those two things. So the tension is the ideation pushing up against, well, we still need some production, we need results. And to some extent, that might be people pushing for status quo or agents, systems. And in this case, we can think a lot about the fact that many systems push for stability, because when we have bureaucracy, it's a stable structure. It's not designed for flexibility. All right, so there's a core tension there, and this tension is really important to understand because the tension is the key dynamic underlying complexity and underlying adaptation. All right, so we've got the need to innovate, need to produce, pushing against each other. That's tension. It creates stress. It creates pressure. The pressure is translated into what we feel as tension or what the system experiences. But to understand how to make this adaptive, we've renamed that conflicting. So we call that tension conflicting. And we talk about how those are a conflict situation, but it actually is a beneficial kind of conflict because you want to engage the conflicting, the different worldviews, the different perspectives, the different ideas, and those pressures of pushing for innovation and pushing for production or pushing for change against the desire to stay in status quo. That key tension is what we need. So that's what we call conflicting. All right. We have conflicting then, and we get people who are pushing or agents that are pushing against each other, but that only is beneficial if it's combined with connecting. So the way to get an adaptation or an adaptive outcome is to engage these two things, the conflicting, connecting dynamic in what we call adaptive space. And the adaptive space is the condition that allows this to engage appropriately. So for example, we had in the pandemic to make change. So then the pressure was, can we go to remote work? And I was working with the CEO of a healthcare system here and heard him talking about how this went. And they're saying, well, we need to go to remote work. But in the past, he would always say, we can't do that. We're going to lose productivity. But people say, we don't have a choice. We can do it. And then he says, okay, how do we do this? How do we actually make this work? So then they put a committee or a team on it. They create adaptive space. They have dialogue. They get IT involved. They have lots and lots of interaction of the conversations around how do we do that. But the good news is that in the conflicting, they're able to get to connecting to come up with adaptive solutions. So IT says we can make it work this way. We'll get people the things that they need. The CEO says, okay, fine, we'll do it, but I'm going to monitor the results and make sure that we're managing productivity. And all of you managers and organizations need to figure out how to do that, how to deal with that. So that would be an adaptive space of a conflicting and connecting process that leads to an adaptive solution that then allows the system to realign to be in the new normal. All right, so the production allows us to focus on current results, but the reason we need adaptability is because that is for the long-term viability or survival of the system. So what is adaptive space? Adaptive space is the conditions that allow the adaptive process to occur. And now we see the full picture. So it's the pressures that come in, we engage the tension, we open up the adaptive space, we operate within it, and that then allows us to generate the adaptive outcome. Now, the cool thing that I like about this is, in the last slide I showed you, it's about sustainability and current results. But the really interesting thing is this dynamic is so powerful that it is actually what we call a fractal, which means that it goes across level. So this, I've talked about this in a system, in a broader ecosystem, or in a business organization, but this same process occurs in our heads. So we as individuals also go through the adaptive process. And many of you right now are in this masterclass. Well, why are you in the masterclass? My guess is you're saying, well, we need to do things differently. We need to innovate. And yet there's still the need to produce. So you're thinking, how can I get new learning without quitting my job and going back to school, or going and doing something else to get the learning and then coming back to work? Instead, the masterclass allows you the way to get the new learning, the novelty, but still be producing for yourself so that you can stay in your job, in your work, and even help your organizational systems to be more effective. All right, so that's the basic idea. Now, if we take that adaptive process, I've already described it, and you think about that in your head, I'm sure many of you can relate that you do that or you've gone through it. But now I'm going to show you how it works in an organizational setting. So this is the adaptive process as it unfolds across a larger organizational system. So what happens here again is the pressures come in. So you and NHS have lots of pressures. And if you're trying to figure out, how do I use this material? What do I do with it? Where do I start? And I saw that question. I would say start with pressures. Too often we ignore them. Pressures are our friend. I like to say play in the pressures. So look to see where pressures are in the system or what pressures you're experiencing, because systems that are experiencing pressure naturally have some adaptive space, especially if it's a complexity event. The adaptive space naturally opens up. And so it's there. It's a question of whether you can operate within it. All right, the other thing to recognize here is that there are locals. So just because you're experiencing a pressure, it doesn't mean someone else is, or it doesn't mean the whole organization is. So you've got to recognize that people operate in local, and there's a local context, but there are also other locals. So other locals might be experiencing pressures, and you can think about that. And if they're experiencing pressures, you might be able to link up yours with theirs, but pressures, number one. All right, so when the pressures come on a system, it's experienced at the local level, it starts to activate that ideation or need to innovate. And in organizational settings, we call that the entrepreneurial system. So the entrepreneurial system is the system that's pushing for opportunity recognition, let's go do this. Or we've got learning, let's try to use the learning to get things done. So it's novelty, learning, growth, opportunity, those kinds of things. And in strategy, they call this exploration. All right, so the entrepreneurial system starts to do the exploration process, and it starts to generate some new ideas. That's the ideation, and you see these dots over here, and I'm going to show you this again in different ways. So local entrepreneurial starts to activate, and these can be in different geographic locations, but they're connected together. All right, so what they do then is they say, oh, we've got something new, we've tried it out, it works locally, now we want to take it bigger. So the next step is they're going to try to take it bigger into the organization. And this is where they're trying to enable emergence. So another mindset that we talk about in the change in leadership is that we've got to have an emergence mindset. And I'll talk with you about that at the end. All right, so they try to push the idea out. And you see, though, what is happening is they've got to now go out into other parts of the system. And the big difference in what I'm describing here is that we're talking about a network dynamic. So historically, we talk about organizations as structures with divisions and functional areas, and I know you still have those. But the second thing I would encourage you to do in terms of how do I start or where do I start is start to think about the organization as a network and network connections. Don't think about divisions or other units, work units necessarily. Think about agents and networks, and how can I reach out to other people, and how can I enable a network dynamic? We hear a lot about networking now, and that's because we're in so much complexity. So build your network, think about connections that you can make and how you can link up with others. All right, so then to be able to do that, you've got to have some adaptive space in the organizational system. You take it through that adaptive space by engaging the conflicting and connecting process with these others. But then the key part that you just saw play out is this other side of the model, which is tipping it into the operational system. So this is the piece that I talked about that's responsible for results. This is what takes new ideas or takes entrepreneurial thinking and converts it into an order or a structure, an infrastructure that allows the system to generate results. So that's the operational system. And the challenge is, if you're trying to advance new ideas, how do you get it into the system? Well, what do we know about the systems? We know that they're really rigid because by definition, they're set up to be able to produce, and they usually operate based on stability. So that system is often not flexible. But the key thing we have to do in a complexity way of thinking is we have to get people operating in the operational system. And that might be many of you in this webinar right now. You might be in those kinds of positions. Then what you need to do is adopt a flexible or adaptive mindset that allows you to think differently about how you can take change and accommodate change that comes from this entrepreneurial and adaptive space and gets into how it can get into the operational system. Because unless it gets in, it can't form new order. And without new order, you don't have adaptation. So that's the basic flow of the model. I'm going to now map leadership onto this, and I'm going to say that this causes us to think about different kinds of leadership from what we've historically considered in organizations. So on the left-hand side, that role of the individuals or the agents or the collectives that do this is called entrepreneurial leadership. The middle part of enabling the adaptive space is called enabling leadership. And then we have operational leadership. Now, a key thing that I want to say here, and a lot of people get confused by this, they think, well, I'm an operational leader, so I'm always operational leadership. That's not how it works in this model, in the complexity thinking in the framework. Instead, there might be people who are managers or leaders in the operational system, and they might be responsible for that. But if they're operating in a complexity context, what they're doing is they're becoming entrepreneurial. So even people in the operational system can engage the entrepreneurial process if they start this ideation. So an easy way to think about that is we like to say, well, there's the pyramid and the people at the top, they're just the strategic leaders and they're doing all the operational stuff, or the people in the management positions. But that's not true, because the top also tries to drive change. The top also feels the pressure. So when people in the organization, let's say at the top, who are trying to ideate and say we need to do things differently, when they do that, they're actually engaging in this entrepreneurial piece. And they too might have trouble getting it into the operational system. So you think, oh, the top or people in operational roles can get this in. That's not true. So they struggle with it just as much as people within the organization do. Okay, so those are the three kinds of leadership. Let me run through and show you what those are. So entrepreneurial is individuals and groups who act as leaders, regardless of title, to advance novelty leading to beneficial change. So this is people who think outside the box. The entrepreneurial piece at the bottom is they see needs and problems, they identify creative solutions, they see opportunities. So you can look at this and say, well, is that me? Do I do this? And many of you out there will say, yeah, because I'm guessing that there are a lot of people who think this way, who are on this call trying to figure out how you can get your thinking better integrated into the organization. But there may be many of you saying, I don't do that at all. That is not my skill. That's not my forte. And I'm going to tell you, that's okay. This is why we need this collective mindset around leadership, because it is a collective. So not one person doesn't have to do all of these things. What you need to do is figure out where you fit in this and how you can then partner with others to enact or co-produce, co-construct leadership that can create this dynamic that organizations need. All right, the second one is enabling leadership. This is individuals often in positions of formal authority who enable and protect adaptive space. So you saw this was the middle piece of the model. I say that this is usually people in positions of authority because often it requires that to be able to engage the adaptive space. It's a challenging role. It's something very new. I don't think many people are very skilled at it because it hasn't been part of our training. It's not a part of leadership development, and it isn't how systems have been structured in the past. The hierarchical system does not promote this. All right, so you'll notice the pictures here. What do we have when we talk about enabling leadership? Well, there are two pieces. The left picture is that nurturing the idea. So that's the left side of the model of the entrepreneurial. And as you recall, there were the three circles, but there was overlap. So adaptive space overlapped. This would be the overlap on the left-hand side of the model where the enabling leadership is helping create the conditions to protect the ideation process or nurture the ideation process. And then this right picture is that emergence flow, which ultimately ends up in the operational system, which I'll show you in a second. But you see the messiness of this. So I love this picture because it just shows you it's all roundabout. It's not a linear process. By definition, complexity they talk about it, it's a mathematical theory quite often, and it's nonlinear dynamics. So it's going to go in all kinds of directions. It might stifle or snuff out in certain parts. It's not an easy process. It's kind of hectic like this. It's like working your way through a puzzle. But if you are doing enabling right, you're creating the conditions that allow that emergence event to occur. And then there's operational leadership. So this is a really important role. And I'm suspecting there are many of you out there who probably are doing this or can do this if you understand it well enough. So this is individuals who help realign and loosen up the operational system to be able to accommodate the new order. So if you look at the picture, there's the messiness of the emergence. And we know that it gets to this point where it's at the edge of the operational system and needs to tip in. So what operational leaders do who operate through this new mindset, this complexity thinking mindset, is they help take that and they say, I'm not going to just reject it. I'm not just going to say no. Instead, I'm going to help you figure out how we can realign the bureaucratic system or the operational system to get this into a new order that will help us be more adaptive, more sustainable, and still produce results. All right, so here's one more. I'm going to show you this in an animation. So it's the same thing again. I find that if I show it to you many times, it helps it to sink in a bit. So what does it look like in the organization? And I want you to, again, think about yourself relative to how this process works. So this is the organizational system, the adaptive process. And here on the left-hand side, we have an agent. So this yellow dot is an agent. In this case, I'm going to call it a person because we're talking about humans and human systems and how we get things done. So we'll also make that yellow dot a human agent. And that human agent is under pressure from a complexity event that's causing it to have to address an adaptive challenge. An adaptive challenge means I need to do something different. There isn't a known solution. There's not a technical solution. I need some kind of novelty. It's really conflicting. There are lots of worldviews and perspectives around how this can occur, but I need to figure out how to do it and engage with others to get this done, or else the system isn't going to survive. So that's what this agent is experiencing. All right, so then the agent starts to ideate, and in that ideation process, it begins to socialize the idea. So now it's got an idea, but it starts to partner with others and engage discussion and creativity. They call this collective creativity. And so it's a collective co-creation or co-production process where they're starting to figure out how they can get things adapted and changed in the local environment. All right, so they have success and they've now got an idea, and I can talk more about this if there are questions about it, but they've got an idea they've been able to generate, and I think, again, many of you will relate to that. But now the challenge is, how do we scale it? So, okay, we've got a prototype, or we've got something on a local level. How do we actually get it out to other parts of the organization and link it up with the rest of the organization so that we can get the new order? So yellow starts to reach out, and again, you see these other colors. We can call those different work units, and those units are networks. So they start to reach out in their network to make connections with other parts of the system. All right, that's connecting. They have some success. People start listening to them. They're able to at least get a conversation or a meeting. But what inevitably happens is when they do this, they're going to hit conflicting. I'm just going to tell you, this is inevitable. And this is the part that I see many people mess up. So if there's a third thing you need to know, it's that when you do this, you are going to hit conflicting. It's a part of the process. Don't get defeated by that. So conflicting can be felt like pushback, or people saying no, or people saying that's never going to work. It's all kinds of things that happen in that conflicting. But the key to being able to advance is how you manage and navigate this process right here. All right, so groups that do this well, or individuals, agents, is they recognize that was pushback. Okay, now I've gotten some feedback from the system. That was conflicting. I'm not going to listen to the conflicting, take it back, and I'm going to iterate. So iterate the idea based on what I heard in the conflicting, and then see if we can go at it again. So this is an iterative process of going back and forth. All right, so this time they go back out again, but this time they're successful. So their iteration worked, and the other networks, the other groups say, yeah, okay, we can do this. But the challenge of it is now those have to iterate. So you see the more local iteration because those other units now need to change. That's why this is so hard. You're asking other units to be able to make that adaptation. So you have to recognize that. All right, so you've got that has occurred, and now they've iterated. And the next step is we're going to go forward again. So now we've got a couple groups aligned with us. We're starting the scaling. We keep going. We keep hitting conflicting. Then we are so skilled at this. We are able to get the connecting along with the conflicting. So we've made it further across the system. We're amplifying this. This is increasing in terms of the strength and the snowball effect of this change. And then we get to this point. And this is what I call the gray dot. So the gray dot is a really critical stage. This is at the edge of the operational system, and this is the part that needs to tip it in. And this gray dot is what we call a sponsor. So a sponsor is a really key person, player, agent, or people that help tip this into the operational system. And when you get sponsoring, they do the linking up or the connecting. They deal with the conflicting on the operational side. All right, what we've learned from our work is don't get sponsors too early. So if you try to get that gray dot when you're still over on the left-hand side, it's not going to work. You have to get the sponsor at the right time. There might be multiple sponsors along the way, so you can consider that. Or if it's a unique sponsor, they might be able to help with that. But typically, you don't want to get that sponsor too early. The other key thing we've learned in this process is don't ask for a yes or no. A big mistake you make is if you go out, you call a meeting, you have your initiative, you're really excited about it, you propose it, and then whammo, it gets stopped. That's a problem. You don't want to be doing the meeting and have the yes or no until you've actually done your process of conflicting and connecting to know that you've got the alignment. That meeting should be the final step. It should be the rubber stamp on a decision that's already made. And if you're going out and you're networking or socializing this, you want to do it through questions, a lot of inquiry, rather than trying to tell people what to do. A lot more to that, but that's the basic idea. Okay, so then the challenge is the brick wall. And the brick wall is something that is very real, but I'm going to tell you that I don't think it has to be part of what happens in organizations. I think it can be perceived or it can be created when people don't manage this process right. So when I work with leaders, what I find is that the best leaders I see in organizations that are doing this well have people above who say, I'm breaking down brick walls. So they have people in key administrative positions or hopefully the CEO saying, my job is to break down a lot of brick walls. And so they're trying to manage it from the operational side. But you also have people skilled at knowing how to advance this kind of work and these kinds of initiatives and scale adaptability by not hitting brick walls, or if they hit the conflicting, not framing it up as a brick wall. All right, I only have a couple minutes left, and I want to just mention what emergence is, because I think this is a really important piece of it. So the mindset shifts that we talk about, and I talked about in the teaser video, were the top down to collective. Then the adaptive mindset, which I've just given you a lot of things related to it. So understanding the adaptive process and the kinds of things we just talked about. But then there's an emergence mindset. So I want to just spend a couple minutes showing you what emergence is. So in emergence, we have agents again. So those agents are the dots. And in emergence, agents begin to bond. So something is motivating or activating them. They come together, they start to form links. So I'm just going to use the example of what's happening in our country, because it's so fresh and real right now, which is the attack on the Capitol. So how did that emergence event occur? Well, it's been happening for a long time, because we have this term I just learned about from a paper, a special issue we did, which is ressentiment. I don't know how to say that, it's probably a French word, but it's the idea that people are really unhappy and they're feeling that they're down and they want to fight against something, fight against the system. And so we had that happening. And so people start to bond around it, or agents. All right, then the bonded agents become aggregates. So now you get groups, and we know that there are multiple groups behind these things that are happening. And then they form up with big other aggregates to form a meta aggregate. And so in this middle part, now we start to see this thing that became Trumpism, or the Trump doctrine, where aggregates are becoming a bigger meta aggregate. And then at some point, it doesn't just form a meta aggregate, it becomes a phase transition, which takes on a new form. And that happened a couple of weeks ago when we had the attack on the Capitol. So that's an emergence event that starts on the local level, goes through an aggregation or emergence process, and then becomes something bigger. What makes that happen? Well, technology. So agents aren't just people. This could not have happened without the technology that we have that enabled the connections. So we had the connections of social media where people can find each other, but we also had Trump and Twitter. So you take an agent and you bond them, and you Trump with Twitter, that creates incredible complexity. Just that dyad bond right there between two agents, Trump and Twitter, manifested so much complexity on the world. And now we see we've just delinked that, and look at what it did. It disempowered that dynamic. Again, more to it we could talk about because it doesn't mean the underlying sentiments go away, but this is how movements and how complexity and emergence work. All right, the other thing I want to bring up is that there's a tag or an attractor which can pull a dynamic toward it. So the MAGA hat became a symbol or a tag. I was listening to you all talk, you said that ask the elephants. And so I love that because that's basically a story that has a tag with it and it creates sticky language. So it can generate some movement. If you all then start going out and saying, using that as a tag, you can create change by doing more, ask the elephant. So those are, I think you might have had some other ones too, but those are tags or attractors and they become really important in a complexity dynamic. And then the fundamental bottom line of an emergence mindset is that you want to watch what's happening in the environment around you. You want to look for opportunities, threats, or trends, things that can link up. And if they link up, they can generate something fundamentally different. That can also open up opportunities for you, like the pandemic. The pandemic was a situation that opened up adaptive space around telemedicine or telehealth. So I've been working with people who've been trying for years to push telehealth, and like that, in 1 month, all of a sudden it's just taken off. That's because there's a trend or an opportunity from an emergence event. And then playing in the pressures, which I talked about before. And the final piece is knowing how to link up and feed and fuel emergence, which is that everything I showed you in that model of how you drive it. Okay, I think I did it. I was only a couple minutes over 30 minutes. So Catherine, hopefully that got what you needed. So I'm going to turn it back to you.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Mary. And while you were talking there, the chat was going wild with people really engaging with the theory. So thank you very much. So we've now got a good half an hour where you can have a chat with each other and think about what that means for you in your context. So it's the theory is great, isn't it? But how do we apply it if we want to really make a change in leading personalised care? So I suppose a couple of things that I got from that. So it was really interesting that you chose that Trump model, Mary, to talk about emergence and the spread of something through networks. In the course booklet that we've put together, we talk about change being spread through networks. And of course, there is other research around this. So, for example, happiness can be spread through social networks. Smoking is spread through social networks. You are more likely to smoke if your friend's friend's friend smokes, even if you've never met them. So if we've got something like personalised care, we've got a change we want to make because we feel so passionately that we need to put people at the centre of their care and give them choice and control. How do we use that learning to socialise the idea, bridge into other networks and enable emergence to happen? So I suppose that's the first thing. How do we drive forward personalised care in where we live and work? There's also the thing about sticky language. We talk in the course booklet, Mary, about the Black Lives Matter movement and how that went from, there's a little video we've linked to, going from 3 words to a movement. So it's that, how can you get that tag, that sticky language? Absolutely. So all of these things tying up. And I think the other thing to mention, so in terms of how you might apply this or think about it in your own practice, is we've got the system, the health and social care system, under enormous pressure due to the pandemic. So the pressure could be our idea of personalised care and how we get things to change, but it could also be this system under external pressure. How do we make sure that we have got enough adaptive space in the middle so that when we emerge through this, the new normal or business as usual actually has personalised care? We certainly don't go backwards. We actually move forward to somewhere better. So we've got a situation where everything's thrown up. There are lots of possibilities. How can we make sure that those walls aren't there and that we're kind of finding ways for those people who with ideas to kind of to take them forward and not to lose the gains we've had, and in fact to move this even forward? So do we ever want to go back to not having telehealth? I don't think so. So I think there's a couple of things there, depending on where you are in the system, that are important. And just one more thing to pick up on before you go to your discussion groups is, when we're talking about the system, It can be your organisation, but not forgetting that the system itself is made up of the people that live and work in a place, and social care and the voluntary sector. So we're not just talking about NHS organisations. So if we're trying to get things to happen in the system and we're trying to make a change here in the NHS, what we want to make sure is that we're alive to all of the consequences of anything we might do and the knock-on effects that might have elsewhere in the system, because we're all connected in that network. So just a few things there to help you, you know, kind of in your discussion. So the questions, we're going to put those in the chat. We'd also encourage you to take a picture of them, and we'll also broadcast them into your chat rooms. So there's 3 ways that you can remember what these questions are, but they're relatively simple. The first one is, how well are you as a leader enabling the adaptive process or adaptive space right now? And the second question, what could you do differently that might help to embed personalised care more effectively? So what could you do to change your practice, your leadership practice, or influence that of others around leading in complexity and adaptive, creating adaptive spaces? So you've got, we've got half an hour for that. So we'll give you a warning at 1:45, and then you'll come back here at 10:10. We'll have a little bit of feedback and a few last words from Mary, and then we will close the session. So really enjoy your discussion, and see you in about 25 minutes, half an hour. Thank you. Really good to see you. I've got you all on gallery view now, so I can see all your lovely faces, and I hope you had a chance for a good discussion. A few people got kicked in and out, and this kind of happens with Zoom, but hopefully you did get a chance to have some discussion about what, you know, kind of to reflect on what you've learned in the context of personalised care and your own leadership. So thinking about the questions then, so they were about what are you doing well that's around adaptive leadership right now, and what could you do differently? Would you just like to share some thoughts in the chat? And then I will go to the chat monitors to pick up some themes. And if there is time, we might be able to hear from 1 or 2 people as well. We've got about 10 minutes left before the end of the session. So just give us a little bit of reflection in the chat now about what your reflections are and what you've learned today. I wonder if I could, Christy, are you with us? I wonder if I could go to you, and if you could give us any feedback from your room.
Can you hear me okay, Catherine?
I can.
Great, thank you. Sorry, people in my group, we were in the middle of a conversation, weren't we, and we got cut off. So I think the essence of what we were talking about was involving people in conversations right at the beginning, even before the conversation has formed, really, because sometimes we wait for the right time to invite people in, and actually it's just great to get them in and get the ideas forming right at the beginning. And so that was a variety of stakeholders and people who use services as well. I think that was the essence of what we talked about, Catherine. And one member of our group gave a really good example of how she'd shifted the power dynamic between her as a social prescriber and clinicians, because clinicians have realised how much they need that additional resource.
Fantastic, thank you so much. So that's hopefully given you a bit of time to put in the chat whilst Christy was giving some feedback from that one group there. So shall I go back to Julie, and then I'll come to Simon and then Paul to pick up any themes that are emerging in the chat right now.
Yeah, so there's some really good themes around having the courage, being braver. And then there's also quite a few that are saying it's okay, don't be afraid of having messy conversations, or don't be afraid of being in a messy situation. And we was talking about that in our group, in our room as well, that quite often having a mess and having that level of chaos means you're doing things right, and you're at the edge of getting into that change process really well. So I always find it encouraging when people are saying, but it's all a bit messy. I always think, must be doing a good job then. Other comments are, if you don't ask, you might not get. So just the courage of being asking and questioning and checking is coming through, and being allowed to make mistakes. It's all right to make mistakes. You know, somebody said, if you're not making mistakes, what are you making?
I love that. Thank you so much. Anything else that you're picking out from the chat, Simon?
The same things were coming out for me, to be honest. I think there is a whole raft of comments around just being, I guess there's something about the space that's opened up has allowed us to be more human with each other. They're kind of being interrupted by children and dogs and post people deliveries all the time, that sort of thing, that kind of levels the playing field and helps to have different kind of conversations, which is really helpful. And allied with that, the kind of the you know, just to let go and feel comfortable with that, getting away from that idea of the kind of hierarchy impeding on conversations, just to kind of like be more human.
Lovely, thank you, Simon. And Paul, anything else that we should pick up on from the chat?
Well, some of the excellent conversation. We need to take the chance to change, and I think that's about innovation. I mean, in my chat session, though, there was some talk that obviously currently with all the pressures of COVID, it was sometimes quite difficult to innovate. Although equally, there has been some incredible innovation because of it. So there's always kind of a contradiction, but people are under immense pressure. But give, you know, and somebody's put there, give change a chance. Exactly.
Yeah, I think I picked up on something about having the space to reflect is really, really important. Time to step back and have conversations with people.
Yeah.
Mary, I wonder if you want to say a few words on what you've heard, or maybe what you've been looking at in the chat here, and any last reflections from you.
Yeah, so I haven't had a chance to read the chat because I've been listening to what people are saying. I think it all sounds fantastic and on track. A couple, I think, parting comments I would make, and trying to keep it simple, are that the network starts with you. So I did see earlier, there was a comment that it's hard to see the NHS as a network because it is so departmentalized. But look, you've got all of you right now in a masterclass, and you're creating your own network. So you can start to break down those barriers. And what we mean by a network is just making sure that you've got connections and the ability to reach across and reach outside to others. So truly the network starts with you. And I think the other final comment would be that if there's any one change you can make, it's starting to change your mindset. So I know that there are behaviors and skills involved, but if you change your mindset, it will help make it easier for you to get those behaviors and skills. And I want to remind you of the mindset shifts. So shifting from the idea of top down to collective, shifting to an adaptive mindset. And I talked about that today. That's understanding the adaptive process, but it's also just understanding the importance of adaptation and having the orientation for yourself that you should be looking for opportunities to adapt and to help others do that, and understand the pressures that come in. And when those pressures come in, it does require change. So shifting your own mindset to be more comfortable with adaptation and with adaptability, and practicing that for yourself and for the organization. And then the more advanced one there is the emergence mindset. So I really encourage you to start thinking about emergence. And if you start watching things or even reading, and I would encourage, Catherine, that you work with the group on developing an emergence mindset. Once you have it, you start to see it all around you. And it really, the light bulb goes off and you see the world differently and start to imagine possibilities you couldn't otherwise.
Thank you so much. Absolutely fabulous summing up. So just before we finish, I want to do a quick poll to see if anything's changed for you over the course of this. So it's the same question. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is low, could you rate your understanding of leading in complex systems right now? No, and no judgment. If your understanding hasn't shifted, it might shift tomorrow or the next day. But let's see if there was any change. It's just nice to have these little gadgets, isn't it? And it shows us. So just over half of you have voted. We've got a few more people in the kind of like 7s and 8s here. So it does look like you have kind of really increased understanding during this 90 minutes, which is fabulous. Nearly all of you have voted. So there's nobody in 1 and 2 and only 3 people in 3, which is absolutely fabulous. And of course, those people in 3, I do hope that you didn't start at 8 and you've gone backwards. But even if that is the case, sometimes when we are learning, we move from unconscious incompetence into conscious incompetence. So you suddenly find out more about what you don't know. So that would actually be okay. But it was quite interesting, just as a snapshot, Mary, for you, hopefully, that there's been a big increase in people's self-reported perception of their understanding of leading in complexity as a result of this. So thank you very, very much, Mary, and thank you for everyone's participation. So I'm just going to tell you what's coming up. So there's a couple more slides before we finish. So the next masterclass is on the 28th, and that's at 11 o'clock. And that's on host leadership with Mark Bacurgo, which I think you will find absolutely fascinating, fits in so well with this. So it's the concept of leader actually not as a kind of a heroic leader or even a follower, but actually as a host of change. So I think you'll find that really interesting. And do feel free to connect with us on our socials. If you haven't applied for an Action Learning Set, we might have 1 or 2 places. I can't promise it, but do email us on our email address, which I think might be on this last page here. But one last massive thank you to the team and of course to Mary for your time today, for the fantastic input. We very, very much appreciate it. Thank you so much. Hopefully we've got some music to play you out. Thank you.